So a lot of people doubt the effectiveness of herbal medicines, plant medicines, mineral medicines. And we see that when people are using Lumna, they're having an effect that they're not having, even with some pharmacological experiences that they've had. So I'd love to know, what you would say to people who doubt the strength of herbal medicines.
Definitely. It's a really good question, and it's very valid. There's so many factors that go into it. It goes back to what we were kind of just talking about, that the supplement industry, including herbs, are unregulated. So there's a lot of adulterated product out there. There's a lot of weak product or product that isn't what they say it is. So, sourcing, I would say, is number one. When I hear people say, well, I tried herbs and they didn't work. Well, first of all, you didn't try every herb that's ever existed. So there's that. But, what was the source? How old was the product? Was it sitting on a shelf? Powdered herbs should not have a shelf life of 6 months. If they've been sitting there for 3 or 4 years, you're essentially just getting fiber. There's nothing to it. What's the form factor? Is it a tincture? Is it supposed to be a tincture, or is it supposed to be a tea? Is it supposed to be extracted in fat? What about the plant part? If you're using the leaf when you're supposed to use the root, you're not going to have the right effect. So people who are novice, working or novice herbalists might not even be doing it right. And then again, adulteration, that's a huge thing in the supplement industry. There have been drugstores basically that had supplements on the shelves that were found to have gluten or rice flour, and no actual herb in them at all. And these are big supplement names. So knowing your sourcing, I'm always huge about this with my patients. You have to cough up the money for a good source, because otherwise you're wasting your money and possibly actually harming yourself. So all of that's really, really, really important with plant medicines or any kind of natural or supplement, unregulated medicines like this or supplements. Also dosing. So I find classically people are dramatically underdosing what they're taking. They said, oh, I took this tincture once and, it didn't work. So I'm like, okay, how much do you remember how much you took? Oh, 10 drops 3 times a day. You're supposed to be taking a teaspoon 3 times a day. A teaspoon is 150 drops. So just to, have that, it's people are taking tiny amounts. And for some people that's enough. There are people who are super sensitive, they need a tiny bit. But for most Americans and our lifestyles, we need mega doses to have an effect, or a strong, standardized extract, or a strong concentrated extract of the bioactives to have an effect. And again, that also goes to, there are, not for everything, but for a lot of these plant medicines, there is a therapeutic dose that has been established in the research, and we need to be getting to that therapeutic dose. If you're taking, it's just like if you were taking, ibuprofen, you're supposed to take 600 milligrams, let's say, and you take 100 milligrams, you're not going to have the same effect. You can't say ibuprofen doesn't work. No, you didn't take enough, so same thing. Also, absorption is a huge thing if somebody has gut issues. So if somebody has gut, there might be an impairment in their absorption of taking something. Or again, maybe, for example, medicinal mushrooms, if you want the immune modulating benefits, you need to have the water extract, like a tea, or just eat it straight up. But if you do an alcohol extract with no water, you're not actually getting the polysaccharides, the beta glucans that increase your immune system. So is it even in the right form? Now for other things, like for the BDNF with lion's mane, you can do an oil extract and you're getting what you need. Now you might not have the water solubles for the immune system, but this all is very nuanced. The chemistry, the phytochemistry, the biochemistry matters. What constituents are you trying to get? And are you using the right menstruum or extractor for that? Also indications. This is a big deal too. In modern medicine, in allopathic or conventional medicine these days, it's oh, you take this for that, you take this for that. Oh, you're stressed, maybe ashwagandha won't work. Well, what is the historic indication? Is it being used how it's been used historically? Is it being used the way the current, even current clinical evidence says? Are you using certain there's like organ affinities that certain plants have. So like dandelion root is great for the liver, but dandelion leaf is great for the kidneys. It's a diuretic. So are you using that in, or whoever's telling you to take this, do they have that in mind? Oh, this is going to work on this organ system. Again, we're focusing mostly on nervous system herbs, and that's intentional, right? So, but if you're taking something for your kidneys, it's kind of made to be for your liver or your brain, it gets dicey. So again, if you don't have current clinical evidence, then what about historic evidence? And are you using it in, or did you use it in accordance with one or both of those? Another thing that needs to be stated is formulations. You know, herbs in general, in almost every, globally in traditional medicine, and traditional, I mean like world medicines, herbs have been used in combinations, in formulations for synergy. You don't just take a heavy dose of one herb only and expect it to work. You're firing on a bunch of cylinders, putting them all together and having this, you know, we call that herbal synergy, or like with cannabinoids, the entourage effects, that you need less CBD if there's a tiny bit of THC, for example, or less THC if you have some CBD, just a basic example, or with all the terpenes that are in the cannabis plant, or other bioactive constituents within the cannabis plant, like they all work together. That's the entourage effect. But you get that also in these more complex herbal formulations that you just can't get with one herb alone. And that, again, that's traditional use. That's also, you know, biocompatibility. In general, plants are much more biocompatible with our bodies than something like pharmaceuticals that are synthesized from petroleum, essentially. So you have a lot more biocompatibility, but are the herbs compatible together? You know, if it was a formulation, or was it, there are all these variables that are really important. And then there's just the basics, my due diligence in saying, this is, you know, I practice individualized medicine, personalized medicine, like for whatever idiosyncratic reason, one herb might work really, really well for me that doesn't work at all for somebody else, and vice versa. Somebody might say, oh, have you tried whatever? You know, I'm obsessed with it. It works so great. And I try it and I'm like, oh my God, that gave me a headache, or I didn't, what, you know, whatever. They love it. I don't. Different physiology, different biochemistry, just doesn't work. So there is always trial and error with these things. And there's never a one size fits all in medicine. I've learned that absolutely unequivocally. There's no one size fits all. So just because it didn't work for one person at one time doesn't mean it doesn't work at all for anybody ever.
Yeah. Okay. And I think there was one thing that I wanted to ask you about. It's something that you had shared with me, which is that herbs are also sentient beings, right? And that's something that people forget to consider when comparing to pharmaceuticals.
Yes. Yeah. So there's this idea. So that, and this is actually, I'm really glad you brought this up because I didn't even think about this in this context. There's not only the energetic, you're not just taking in a medicine and it's acting on you. There's also the spirit or the soul or the energy of that plant that's working synergistically with your energy. And if it's not a plant that is super compatible with your with your physiology or with your energy system or with your spirit, it just doesn't jive, it's not going to work, or it could actually have not harmful effects like poison you, but like make you feel worse. Because we do have to think plants are living entities. They have their own life force, their own physiology, and they're acting on us, and we form a relationship with these plants. And of course, as somebody who works with plant medicines, I've formed very deep relationships with certain plants, far more than others, just through working with them, growing them, making medicines out of them, taking them at different times. You know, there is an interchange, and they are finding now plants do have their own nervous system. It's always been thought they're not perceiving, but they perceive when they're touched. They perceive when they have not enough water, when they share nutrients through their root systems, through the mycelial network. I mean, there's so much we don't understand about plants, but there's undeniably an effect of the sort of the soul of the plant, we could say, or the energy of the plant on us, that we're not separate from it when we take it into our body.
Yeah. And which other things like pharmaceuticals don't have that gift to offer us?
Correct. Yeah. They come from petroleum. They're synthesized in a lab. They
Yeah.
might have been plant derived at some point. Most drugs are. Most drugs did come from the plant kingdom originally, but now you've pared it down, stripped it away, stripped out this one constituent, this one isolate from the full plant. It's no longer even made from that plant. It's just a mimic of it. You've lost all of that. And again, there's a time, I'm not anti-drug, like there's a time and a place for pharmaceutical management. I prescribe pharmaceuticals every day, but when we're talking about these broader, holistic, top-down, whole systems approach, you're always going to miss the mark if you're not focusing on the whole.
Right. As well as something that's complicated like nervous system health, right? Which is why an herbal thing is ideal for this. Also, the conversation isn't about herbal medicine or pharmaceuticals. It's great that we have all those options. Like we're having this conversation because sometimes we neglect to consider herbal medicines as a really good alternative, but sometimes we're not understanding why maybe our experience with herbal medicines hasn't been as effective. And I think to kind of recap what we're talking about, there are many different factors to take into consideration. One is sourcing. Sometimes people source something that is adulterated, so it doesn't have the ingredients that you're looking for that are clinically effective. A variety of things, work for different people. So it's important to not just try one thing and just assume that herbs don't work for you because you tried one thing. Form factor is really important, like the form of the plant that you're using. And for example, we use ashwagandha root. How things work together. That's why we use ashwagandha with shatavari. You talked about this in the ingredients, how one is a male herb and one is a female herb. And so that balances each other. The absorption aspect of things, looking at herbs that have a clinical or historical evidence, and then the compatibility thing, which we've talked about. But I think when someone gets it right, they really get it right. And I know that all of these things are things that you really considered. And that's why people are having the experience that they're having with LUMNA, because it has all these things to offer, right? Which is this like sentient healing property that living plants can offer you. It has this like synergetic effect with each other, that using multiple things, in this case we use over 21 clinically effective ingredients, and I think another really beautiful thing is that it's not addictive, and it has long-term root cause effects that are not just treating the symptom. It helps with the symptom immediately because hey, we need that, but like it is also helping repair our nervous system long-term, which is super essential living in this world that we're living in. So
I also want to say, it's really important to say here, I forgot about this earlier, but it's critical, is that I formulated it because I am a physician and because I work with complex chronic illness and people who are what we call polypharmacy, they're taking a lot of drugs. I was very intentional about avoiding any high risk drug herb interaction plant medicines. So meaning that, always, if you're on a bunch of medications, always check with your physician, ideally somebody who understands plant medicines. Don't use something that could potentially interact. But I was very, very intentional about using things that wouldn't interact with the vast majority of medications. Nothing that is like, for sure, because there are certain herbs that absolutely will interact with medications, either make them more or less effective, which can be dangerous. And so I use only the things that would be heavy hitters and would work, but are not hitting one receptor too heavily. Yes, if somebody has Parkinson's and they're taking levodopa, carbidopa, be careful with the mucuna, but like there's very few, and they're pretty fringe cases. Again, due diligence, always ask your integrative provider or find somebody. But these are all herbs that work friendly with other pharmaceuticals if somebody is already taking pharmaceuticals.
Yeah. And I just want to add to that the reason this came up is because Dr. Gals and I both had struggled with anxiety and found that the options that we were offered pharmacologically weren't necessarily I'll speak for myself, just weren't necessarily that helpful. I felt sedated. I felt like there were a lot of side effects and I just it felt like I wanted a solution that made me feel good, not something that just dumbed me down. And that's how we got here with this. And for reasons that we've talked about in previous questions, only herbs are really able to offer you that with something like a complex issue, like mental health.